This lesson, we're going to take a in-depth look at a very important part of V-Ray, and that is its render elements system. And as you can see, our little example scene that we've got here, we've got some nicely displaced ground, these three kind of alien-like structures that are out in the middle of this world. So let's take a peek at the scene file. You can see it's picking up where we left off, talking about our single object properties. We've still got our foreground, midground, background group. It's the same ground plane from the desert cactusy scene, but modified a little bit. And the main purpose of this, we pull up our render settings here. With V-Ray's render element tab, it basically gives us a lot of control over our scene. We want to be able to go in and have all of the pieces that create the image broken out into their separate elements. So specifically, you can think of these as having both utility type passes, which could be things like a depth pass, motion vector pass, all sorts of stuff, RGB mats, lots of different things. And then there's also going to be a set of core beauty passes, as I refer to them. And these beauty passes, as they are, I don't think there's any real, maybe there's a technical term for this, but for me they're just beauty passes, are going to all be added together to create the final look of our image. So in this section of the lesson, we're going to be going into Nuke a little bit as well, and we're going to be really taking a close look at all the different pieces of this. We'll probably do a quick little comp of our scene, and I just nudged my camera, so I'm just going to lock this. We're going to be able to do a quick comp of our scene, and we'll be able to use the different pieces that we have so that we can kick everything out nicely and then composite it. So let's get started. First things first, I'm going to right now create all of the main passes that you can use to have the core kind of beauty passes. So all of these added together are going to be your atmospheric effects. If you're using it, this would be your V-Ray environment fog, which we were in that cactus scene. In this case, I'm not using it. If you're using it, caustics would need to be added in. GI, lighting, refraction, reflection, subsurface scattering, specular, and I'm missing, there we go, self-illumination. Let's get this a little bit bigger on our screen. So I can, with these all selected, I was holding control and just clicking through all of those. I can hit add here. And immediately right off the bat, just so you know, I am just going to remove SSS, caustics, and atmospheric effects because they're just going to be black. But if you were using those, or if for some reason you were using a background image and you needed that to be plugged in as an element, you can add that as well. Generally speaking, you want to be rendering on black so that you can have your alpha held out on black properly, but that is an option. So I don't have subsurface in this scene, so I'm just going to remove it. Don't have caustics, and I'm not currently using environment fog, so we'll just remove that. So my set of passes for this actually ends up being GI, lighting, reflection, refraction, self-illumination, and specular. Honestly, I don't even have refraction in this. This is a fairly simple scene, so I can even get rid of my refraction render element to trim back on the number of channels. So this actually, for this particular scene, is going to be all I need. But do please keep in mind that main set of passes that I initially brought in, because there is a likely chance that you would need that. And actually, what I even recommend doing is exporting yourself a file so that you have them. So let me do that right now while I still may undo and okay. So there's our, and we'll also add in that background. So this could essentially be, and lastly, subsurface. this could essentially be all of the passes that you would need to rebuild. And you may also be asking why there's no shadow pass. The shadow is actually included in the lighting. So all of these can be kicked out together. And you can just say save. And this is actually just going to export a Maya file. So let me just put this in render elements beauty. So you'll actually be able to have that file. And you can, if I was to remove all of these and just say import, I can actually just import these render elements beauty directly and it'll just load in that list for me, which is a really nice feature. Also, if I was to select all these and remove them again, I can actually go to create reference and I can also create a reference of that file. And you can see immediately nothing showed up, but if I turn on use reference, you can see the namespace goes in front of them, and that's now I can see what those different passes are. So let me just get rid of that file. It can be a really useful, that's definitely something very helpful in production type settings. We use that all the time where we have a set of utility passes or whatever it may be that need to go through every shot and need the ability to be updated. So we can utilize the referencing in Maya to do that. Okay, so let's import in our render elements beauty again. Cool. And now let's trim out the ones that we are not going to be needing. And so we're back down to our GI lighting, reflection, self-illumination, and specular. So let me go ahead. I'm going to load up on my regular render view, set this back down to half res, and just do a quick test render, and we can see what we've got going. So this is the actual scene. And we'll shrink that down and do a quick IPR. Cool. So now my IPR is going in. One of the it's kind of a new feature in V-Ray 3 is the ability to really see all of your render elements as you're IPRing, which is fantastic. You can go through and actually in your V-Ray RT you can see all of these different passes. You can see my specular, my self-illumination, reflection, lighting, etc. Right now, actually, you can see I do have my light dome still set to be visible, which is why my background is kind of a dark blue at the moment. I am going to be doing that in Nuke, so I'm going to change that. And you can see the displacement's turned off for V-Ray RT just so it rendered faster, but I can definitely tell that all of my passes are working. All right, so let's go ahead, and first things first, let's start getting this sorted. So I'm going to go to my V-Ray light dome, and we'll set that to invisible. You can see now everything's on black. And what I'm going to be doing next is utilizing another render element. And this render element is going to be our creation of our RGB mats. So RGB mats being the way to pull a alpha of a specific object or material. And V-Ray has a fairly nice system built in. So in this V-Ray multimat, there's actually a lot of scripts on the internet that you can dig up to kind of help automate this process. But in this example, I'm just going to show you how to manually go through and create everything from scratch. So what I'm going to be doing for this situation is I want to have, you can do a combination of object or material RGB mats. And I think what's best is to go in first and to always start with your materials. So let's get going on that. So I'm just going to say show none, show my polygons. I'm just going to actually drag and select. I'm going to open up a node editor window. And it's kind of just doing a graph materials on viewport selection. It's a nice way to just be able to see all of your materials. You can see I've got these, actually just 3 shading groups, which makes this a pretty easy scene to be dealing with. I can go in now and I can create my first multi-matte. So with this multi-matte node, if I just select it here and I hit add, and by the way, do take note, I am creating these on my master render layer, not going through any of these other render layers. You can create an RGB or any render element on any render layer, but you can see that it is setting an override on that to only be turned on, to only be enabled in that layer that I created it in. So back to my master layer. So on this multi-matte, if I expand the V-Ray attributes, you can see we've got red, green, and blue associated object ID numbers, and then a checkbox to use material ID. I am going to be doing a material ID, so I do want to turn that on. And you can see this says 000. And right now, I don't have any material IDs associated with my scene at all, but I can preemptively go through on this multi-matte node, and I can set this to be red will be our object ID number 1, green can be 2, and I can just hit tab to switch through these, and blue can be 3. So down here in my actual node editor, you can see this is my shader for my ground, and this is the shader for the kind of pyramid looking things. And then lastly, this is the V-Ray light material that is assigned to the blobby liquid mesh in the center. And I can go in and I can establish a RGB matte material ID on the shading group itself. Now, I'm making the conscious choice to create this on the shading group, not on the actual shader, because this shader may change. I may decide later that I want a V-Ray bump material in between, and now that material ID is not going to carry through the same. So go back over my shading group, and you can go to Attributes, V-Ray, assign material ID attribute, and now this can be 1. My pyramids can be 2. And the liquid blobby bits can be material ID 3. Now next, I can also go in and I can create a object ID on any different number of nodes. So let's take a look at this guy right here. So there is a hierarchy for this. Oh, by the way, so actually before we get into that, let's just do a quick test run here. You can see. Okay, so it's coming in, and you can see my multi-matte looks like that. So if I was to look at my blue channel, it's just isolated in those bits, my green and my red. And we'll stop that. By the way, you can see, I don't know if you can see this kind of ghost outline of some red that is actually coming through on the LUT. You can see if I do go back to just linear space, everything's totally fine. So I'll just turn the LUT back on and go back to RGB. Cool. So we'll go ahead and stop that. So I do like to name these as well. You can call them whatever you want, but I'm just going to call this RGB and then matte for our material 001. You can also name them a little bit clearer than that if you want. So you can name it, RGB material pyramid or RGB material whatever. And do know this is going to be the name of your channel. For organization's sake, I do also like to name my render element name up here, just like that. And you can see that's not going to update immediately until I close and reopen, and now I've got that RGB matte 001 at the bottom. So let's create one more multi-matte. And on this multi-matte, I'm going to just go ahead and plug in the numbers, so 1, 2, and 3. And now I can go in and establish the object IDs. So the object ID can be utilized, in this situation I've got 3 blue liquid meshes that are kind of my light giving objects, and I know I'm probably going to want control over each one separate later. So I can assign a object ID. The object IDs can be assigned. You can see if you go to Attributes V-Ray, there's an object ID here. There's also one on the transform node. And to make it even more confusing, you can actually assign object IDs on group nodes or on single object properties. The hierarchy goes that the shape node will take precedence first, then the transform, then a group node. Lastly, if you have something on a single object properties, this will give you the ability to override the object ID. So I do kind of encourage you to go in and play with all sorts of combinations to see what works and what doesn't. There are some kind of weird stuff. So like if I assigned a object ID to the group node at the very top, and then I assigned a separate object ID to a transform, it's not going to get both object IDs. It's only going to take one object ID. So let's get this named. So I'm going to call this RGB OBJ001. We'll copy and paste that to the name of the render element as well. And we already have 1, 2, and 3. So now I can go ahead and create the object IDs on the geometry. And I'm going to do this on the shape node just to keep everything consistent. So this one can be 1. And 2. And lastly, that guy back in the back can be 3. And let's go ahead and save our file. And let's do quick IPR. Cool, here's our IPR window. You can see if we go to RGB OBJ001 that the object IDs are propagating through the channel based off of those numbers that I established. Cool. So that's working good. So let's continue forward and start looking at some of these other render elements that we have the ability to create. So it is pretty common that you may want some sort of control over your shadow. V-Ray does have this matte shadow element, which gives you sort of an alpha of the shadow. It's definitely the closest thing to an alpha for the shadow. There's also some very helpful passes. So bump normals. If you have a lot of bump detail that you want to come through on the normals pass, you can use bump normals. If you want to leave that bump information alone, you can use a regular normals pass. Mine's all displacement, so I'm just going to stick to the regular normals pass. There's also a bunch of these raw passes, which we're going to get into a little bit later with some of the compositing side of things. Diffuse color is usually very important. I almost always throw that in. And the diffuse color will give us the ability to divide against my lighting and GI to create some of these raw passes myself rather than creating elements. So there's other cool stuff too. So let's create a Z-depth pass. And on the Z-depth pass, what I like to do is rather than remapping my Z-depth in black and white, because I'm going to be compositing in Nuke, which is very friendly to float values and EXRs. I'm going to set my depth white to 1. I'm going to turn off the clamp. And if I did have any animation, so let's say, maybe this thing was kind of rotating around like that, I can also create a velocity pass, and that'll give me my motion vector information. If you watched my previous video, I believe I discussed this, but if you're on V-Ray 2.4, this clamp velocity checkbox is going to be on, and they changed that default to be off, which is perfect. Exactly what you want. So the velocity pass in 3.0 or 3.1 will come in perfect, and exactly how you want it. Again, if you're on 2.4, you want to remember to keep this clamp velocity off. Cool. So that's kind of it's a little bit of, got a couple We've got our normals, velocity, z-depth, RGB mattes. We're getting a nice little collection of different utility passes created. So the next one I want to talk about here is going to be this extra texture. This extra texture is a very nice render element. It's essentially just empty. And this extra texture render element is just going to go in. It's going to be its own pass, and it'll essentially map whatever texture you have to your entire scene. So something I like to use it a lot for is like mapping a noise texture across everything. So you can see I can actually just go in and I can map a solid fractal to this. So let's grab a 3D texture. Or we'll just grab something from Maya, I guess. We'll just grab a noise, that's fine. And what you can do is actually just get rid of this file name suffix here. And it's actually just going to grab the name of your file texture. So you can just use that. And you could also name this something so that they all group together, like maybe put an U in front of it. In this case, let me just put that there. So let's call that noise 1. And let's create another one now. And this one we can have be my ambient occlusion. So I'm just going to call that AO. And in V-Ray, the ambient occlusion is going to be this guy right here, V-Ray Dirt. V-Ray Dirt is a nice and robust ambient occlusion. You can also bias it to certain axis. If you wanted to have like, rust dripping down from a pipe and kind of just soften the color in a certain direction, you can do that. In this case, I'm just going to leave the settings directly as is, except maybe a couple extra samples on it. And I'm just going to call this AO, so hopefully it'll so that whole channel will be named AO. And then you can see how my lowercase ones are grouped at the bottom. These are my ones that I'm renaming myself. So let's create one last one. So I'm going to use my node editor here. And I'm going to create another extra texture. I'm going to create a point world pass. This point world pass is going to be the XYZ information for my actual scene. So I'm going to use a sampler info node. And I'm just going to take the point world connection out, map it into my V-Ray extra texture. I'm going to name this node point world, and then I'm going to get rid of the file name suffix here. So let's go ahead and save our scene, and let's turn on the IPR again. So there's our IPR coming in. Started off with our RGB matte where we left it. But you can see we got a whole bunch of new passes now. So here's our noise. You can see that would be very useful in compositing, just kind of add some additional color breakup into my scene. The point world pass is going to look a little funky if you have a LUT turned on. You can see though that I have this very clear kind of line down the center of my scene. If I hold down right click, let me drag this pixel information over. I think I need to, there we go. Cool. So if I hold down right click, you can see those values are all float values of where that pixel falls in my scene. And this is a very useful pass. You can do some really awesome stuff with it on the compositing side. If I had any sort of motion blur, motion vector information, that would be in there. And my z-depth is also working now. You can see if I hold down right click that I have float values that match exactly where those objects are going to be. Lastly, AO is looking pretty good. If I turn on the, you can see there's definitely some ambient occlusion style spill happening in there. And that's all of the ones that I created. And normals pass is pretty straightforward. Cool. Seems like everything's working as intended. All right, so before we get into the Nuke side of things, we're going to create talk about one last render element here that I do feel is pretty important. and it's V-Ray's Light Select. So this V-Ray Light Select can be used to go in and actually break out the lights in our scene, which is a really awesome feature. So I've purposely set this scene up and not made it terribly complex. We can kind of show off some of these tools in a simple to use fashion, and then you can kind of build on it yourself and take it into a more advanced scene. So you can see my light group here. So I've got 3 V-Ray sphere lights, and then I've also got 2 rectangular lights in this scene. And these 2 rectangular lights, let me go back, turn on my lights again. These 2, there we go, sorry, they're plug and shape. So these V-Ray rectangular lights are just kind of adding some additional fill on either side of the scene. I've got a light dome that's my global just light. It's really, there's not even an HDRI in it. It's just literally some kind of dark blue because it's a nighttime scene. And then we've got our 3 sphere lights. V-Ray, the V-Ray Light Select, if I create one here, you can see what it does. It actually created a node in my outliner for me, and this node in the outliner is actually going to be able to go in and I can drag and drop lights into it, and we'll be able to create the specific channel for whatever light I drag into it. So for example, if I just middle click drag this V-Ray Sphere Light 1 directly down in here, I'll be able to utilize that. And we'll just undo that. So in this case, let's take a look at my scene. And right now this is all broken up into midground, foreground, background. And so you can be specific about where you want your certain render elements to be. So as an example, let's first, your specific light selects want to be turned on, So as an example, if this was V-Ray Sphere Light 1, maybe I don't want to have that turned on for the other passes or something. You can see this whole network can get pretty complex pretty quickly, but let's start taking a closer look at it here. So if we look at the actual light select element itself, it's broken out into raw, diffuse, specular, and normal. If you want the most amount of control, I actually recommend doing both diffuse and specular. Raw light, it gets a little excessive with this setup. If you really want to go crazy on the Nuke side, you can actually separate out the raw lighting information of each light. It defaults to normal though, and normal I think is usually not what I'm looking for, because it's actually the combination of specular and lighting. And usually we want to dial that stuff separately. So you can see if I set this to normal and I drag that light, V-Ray light sphere into it, and we'll turn on our IPR again. Bring that over here. Cool, so let's go down. We've got, there it is, light select. So you can see if I look at my specular pass, there's that little faint bit of light. And if I go to my light select, that's also still there. So I have both the lighting contribution and then I've got the specular. So you can go in with a little bit of comping. I could subtract the specular from the light select in Nuke and isolate each individual channel, but because that becomes so much different merges, I actually like to create a separate light select. I'm going to stop that now, and I'll show you what I mean. If my IPR wants to close, there we go. So I'm going to name this light select. So you can see, let's actually, I guess we should name our lights a little bit better so this all starts making a little bit better sense organization-wise. So we'll just call this, each one of these ones we'll call a pyramid, because they're just made of pyramids, even though they're spherical. But we'll call this pyramid light. That one will be A in the background. Or maybe just do one. And then this one, the midground can be 2, and the foreground can be 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Cool. So our light select, what I like to do is name them according to what light is going in them. So in this case, I've got Pyramid Light 3. So this is Pyramid Light 3, and then light. So for lighting. And then I do want to name my channel that. Oops. I just pasted something. Did not want to do that. There we go. Cool. And I can just duplicate this, and I can re-drag Pyramid Light 3 into it. And this light select can be called spec. And this can be spec here as well. And on each specific light select node, I'm going to set this one, which is my lighting one, to diffuse. And this one, which is my specular one, to spec. And now I can IPR this. Do a quick scene save as well while that's booting up. Cool, so if you can see right here, Pyramid Light, so we've got our lighting and our specular separate. And you can see there's a pretty significant specular contribution on this, and it also now matches much better against my lighting and specular passes. What I can do is actually, if I only wanted control over this one light, it starts giving me a lot of options because I can just include this light select of these 2 specific elements, and I can subtract them against this other one to get, whatever I'm missing out of it. So you can do some pretty cool stuff. What I like to do, if I know I'm going to be doing a lot of different relighting on the Nuke side with this kind of stuff, I do like to have all of my lights in at least one light select. So I don't even have to use some of the other render elements. I'm only using the light selects. So I'm just going to duplicate this. And this one's going to be Pyramid Light 2. And then we'll duplicate that one more time. And then I've got Pyramid Light 1. And you can see I'm also going to need to go in and rename the actual channel here so they're not just overwriting the same channel in my multi-channel EXR. So I'll get that to Pyramid Light 1. There we go. So Pyramid Light 1, just middle click drag that in. Pyramid Light 2, middle click drag. Oh, almost screwed that up. There we go. And we can double check all these, keep them. So we've got 3, 3. Can double check my channel. That's diffuse, specular. They're named correctly. Number 2, number 2, number 1, number 1. And I really like to just duplicate them in the outliner because it helps keep the type correct. And I know that when I'm duplicating it, I'm getting a light and spec. So this one can be my dome. Oops, I almost screwed that one up. So this is dome light. And then this one will be dome spec. And let's go ahead. That's cool. So 2 more. Well, 1 more set of duplicates. We'll just use our rectangular lights. And I'm actually going to put both the rectangular lights in the next set of, so we'll just call this fill. Or maybe sides. Sides light. And because they're kind of these 2 kick lights on either side. There's like one on the right and one on the left. Cool. So now just need to middle click drag my dome in. And then I can select both of my rectangular lights and I can middle click drag them in. You will take a tiny bit of a render hit on this. Generally speaking, V-Ray is amazingly optimized at this. Oh, there's the thing that I pasted on accident. Let's get rid of that. Don't know what that is. So here's all of our light selects ready to go. And, the only thing I just remembered that I meant to do in this is put ls underscore at the front. And I'm going to go through and do this on every channel so that all of my light selects are all grouped together in my multi-channel EXR. So we'll get all of these in there. Definitely should have done that in the beginning. Would have made this a lot easier. And as I went through that, I realized I didn't finish going through and naming these. So this is going to be dome light, ls. Oh, I pasted that in the wrong spot again. So there's my dome light. This one's going to be dome spec. And sides light. And sides spec. That was exhausting. You can see this is pretty... it's really important to keep yourself organized with this, because you can see how much information I'm creating with this. And especially in a production setting, if anybody was picking up your file, you want it to be as clear as possible exactly what's going on. So let's do a quick save again, and then we'll get my IPR loaded up, and we can start checking all this out. Cool, so here's the IPR. And you can see now all of our light selects are grouped very nicely. So we've got Pyramid Light 1, light, which apparently is doing nothing. It's really far away. There's the light, maybe in 1080p that'll show up. Light 2, there's my lighting and specular. Light 3, lighting specular. Here's my sides lighting, which is really doing almost nothing. There's something in there though. And then the specular. And then we've got our dome light and specular, which again is basically doing nothing. Did I do that one right? That's actually a little concerning. I guess so. I guess that's okay. So let's go ahead. Maybe we'll just turn up our dome light a little bit and see if we can actually see anything. So there's that, and if we go to our dome light now, you see I guess it's just very, very subtle. Maybe it's much more specular based. Yeah, I guess it's really just not doing all that much. It could be a lot more GI than anything. The GI did get a lot brighter, so... anyways, it's in there. Maybe if I had a brighter HDRI, it would be doing something. I'm just going to bring that back down to 1. So I do kind of like the contrasty look here. So I do want to go in and... I'm looking at this in linear. Oh, there we go. That was I'm being totally dumb. I unclicked my LUT when I was looking at the RGB mats, and I didn't turn it back on. It looks much more normal now. You can see the sides spec that's showing some actual lighting information as well. The dome, there's still not really anything. It's just really, really subtle, which is fine. But cool. So we're getting to a spot where we can actually render this out. So I'm going to stop my IPR, and for now, I'm just going to render the master layer. So you can just comp all of these together, because I don't, even though this was carried over from that other chapter, I think that the master layer is actually going to be what I want for this, so that it can, we can just see these different passes together, and I don't need to have all of these light selects for every single render layer. I think it'll be much easier on just a single render layer. So I'm going to go ahead and get my render set up. So this is all good to go. We'll call this version 1. I don't want to render from my depth of field camera. I want to render from camera 1. 1 and 10 is good. Our GI settings are low. Got our massive list of render elements, and I'm going to launch my batch render.